photographing the Jewish community of Istanbul as a point of focus, I started to follow different groups that gathered in different synagogues. For example, in the older section of the city where there had been the Jewish communities in places like Balat and Haskoy, there were some synagogues that would nominally be open for just Sabbath services and services at the high holy days like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. In particular, the Achrida synagogue, Yambol synagogue. And these congregations had their own following of people whose parents or grandparents had grown up in those parts of Istanbul and still came back. It would be like in Philadelphia or New York or anywhere, somebody going back to the Lower East Side to go to a synagogue service where your grandfather or parents might have been, because by the already 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the bulk of the Jewish community in Istanbul had moved from the more traditional places like Balat and Haskoy to the newer neighborhoods like Shishli, Nishantash, and since then they've moved much further afield to every place where middle-class people live today in Istanbul. And in moving, for the most part, the synagogues remain behind in the older neighborhoods, although there's now a synagogue in Shishli, there's some in Jade Bostan and other places where the new centers of Jewish life have moved to in the last 30 years or so. The photographs of the Jewish life in Istanbul evolved over a period of some 5 years. Since I lived in Istanbul, which really was 1985 to 89, if we think about it, it's like 20 to 25 years ago. I, of course, have been back several times for visits. The city has really changed since I lived there, and in fact it's gotten to be a world-class city. I was just reading in today's New York Times, it's one of the most favorite touristic places to visit. One of the things, of course, that's happened in Istanbul over the last 25 years, the place has grown tremendously. I think there's maybe 18 million people there now. Actually, the Jewish community of Istanbul is more or less the size of a Jewish community that lives in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It's like 16 to 17 to 18,000 people. The numbers change depending on who you ask, what year it is, and so forth and so on. Or sometimes it's even said to be a little larger. So there is a whole series of both social clubs and networks that served the Jewish community. There were like charity organizations, help groups that provided care at the old age home, at a Jewish hospital. During the summers, we lived for, I think, 3 summers almost on the island of Bukada, which was where the majority of Turkish Jews would have summer homes and spend their summers. And in that way, I got to know a lot more people as well. And, visiting social clubs where people played cards or had other kinds of entertainment. So there's a whole secondary way of life within the Jewish community, supporting charities, doing all sorts of different things that you could, as an outsider, participate in. You're always intruding at a funeral sometimes. So in Romania, I went to many funerals because there were so many people dying. And while there were probably just an equal amount of people dying in Turkey because it was, a 22,000 population, I went to funerals, but not with the regularity that I did. I went to many public religious events. For example, I used to like going to the Brit Milah, or the ritual circumcision party, for several reasons. One, there was always a lot of really great food served on those occasions. They were almost always in the finest hotels, and it was a good place to network and get to meet people, because one of the things I had to do in order to do this project was to meet a lot of people, find out who might be interesting to include in the film or photograph. So at these ritual circumcision parties, I used to meet a good number of the people in the community, because there were usually events where there'd be 200 to 300 people. Also, I used to go to a lot of weddings. I used to go to certain synagogues. I favored certain synagogues over the others. For example, the 2 synagogues in a small town along the Bosphorus, which is part of Istanbul, called Kuskunjuk, where the person in charge became a friend, and often I'd go there on Saturday to go to religious services. I'd go to the very famous Ahrida synagogue in the Balat area for special holidays and also at different times. Each synagogue had its own following of devoted peoples who would, mainly men I should say, who would come to make a minyan on Shabbat, including a synagogue called the Circaji Synagogue, which is behind the Circaji railroad station, and served a group of people who mainly had migrated into Istanbul from small towns in Thrace.
El hijo de la madre de chico se haga grande. Ay, dormite mi alma, que tu Padre viene con mucha alegría. Nanni, 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 nanni che Eligio della madre de chico se haga grande. Ai avrimesh mi dama, avrimesh la puerta, que vengo cansado de arrar las huertas. Abrir no vos avrò, no venís cansado, sino que venís donde muevo amor. Ah, nanni, nanni, nanni che Eligio della madre de chico se haga grande.
Los caminos de Sirkeci son llenos de arena. Los caminos de Sirkeci son llenos de arena. Yo voy a pasar, yo voy a tornar por ver a ti, morena. Yo voy a pasar, yo voy a tornar por ver.
Queen Isabella issued an order of expulsion decreeing, as the Spaniards reconquered the Iberian Peninsula from both basically from the Moors, they also wanted to make it free of all non-Christians. That included both the Moors and Jewish people. So there was a royal edict saying that all Jews either had to convert or face being burned at the cross. And some Jews secretly carried on their Jewish religion and outwardly converted to Catholicism. The Spanish Jews that were made welcome in the Ottoman Empire brought with them many skills. They were sword makers, they printed books, they had all the skills that they had developed living in what was then one of the most developed cultures of Europe. In the mid-80s, 90s, a large portion of Jewish men were employed in a downtown area in Sirkeci, which is actually where there's a train station. And there were many businesses, but since then businesses are everywhere. So although that was a real center where you would have found a lot of Jewish shops, at this point in time, you would have to be looking really everywhere. Mainly the Jews of Turkey were in business, and there are also doctors, lawyers, teachers, journalists, but for the most part, the Turkish Jews are involved in textile business from every aspect, from making buttons to thread, to making cloth, to selling cloth, making silk. So the majority of Turkish Jewish business was textiles, and lately, with the newer generations, it's changed to advertising, to electronics. In Turkey, the model basically is everybody wanted to be their own boss and have their own business, and it's only as of late that there is the whole corporate sector and all the kinds of jobs that we associate in the West with large businesses. One advantage Turkish Jews had in business is that they were pretty much fluent in up to 3 to 5 languages, so it made it easier for them to be the representatives of foreign companies doing business, and they'd get the franchise for importing an endless number of everything from motors to ball bearings to records to being the agents for Siemens in Germany, for all the various Western European companies.